Imagine sitting in the dark staring at a hiking bag you haven't touched in 6 months, knowing that, inside, wrapped in plastic, is the reason your girlfriend is dying. Welcome, Shadow Dwellers. Tonight I'm telling you 3 disturbing Skinwalker horror stories from the Navajo Nation. A stubborn hiker who accepted a cursed gift, a marathon runner hunted by an invisible weapon, and a skeptic trapped in a trailer with a monster wearing his brother's face. If you're alone right now, you might not want to be. Let's begin. Levi sits in his apartment with the lights off, staring at a hiking bag that's been collecting dust for 6 months. He knows he shouldn't touch it. Opening that zipper is just going to confirm what he's been trying to deny, but he can't help himself. He has to know if the thing that ruined his life is actually real, or if he's just lost his mind. He isn't allowed to see Maddie anymore. Her folks changed the locks on their house weeks ago. They banned him from the hospital room where she's lying right now, staring at a ceiling she can't even see. They blame him for what happened to her. And honestly, they're right to do it. Levi didn't go to the Chuska Mountains to hike. He went because he was 28, stubborn, and spent too much time reading paranormal forums on the internet. He didn't just want to see a ghost. He specifically went looking for a skinwalker. He wanted to see something that wasn't supposed to exist. He dragged Maddie along because she was loyal. She didn't believe in monsters, but she believed in him. Now Maddie is wasting away and Levi is the one left holding the bag. It was a Saturday when everything went south. They were miles off the main trail near Lukachukai. Levi was leading the way, pushing through thick brush and climbing over jagged red rocks. He was looking for these old stone structures he'd read about in a thread about the naaldlooshii. It was a hot day, sun beating down hard, but down in that valley, the air felt heavy. It pressed down on you. It got quiet too. Not peaceful quiet. It was the kind of quiet where the birds stopped singing because a predator just walked into the room. She stepped out from behind a big pine tree like she'd been waiting for a bus. Levi stopped dead in his tracks. He'd seen plenty of hikers out here. They're usually covered in dust, sweat, and grime. That's just how it is in the desert. But this woman, she looked like she just walked off a showroom floor. She was maybe 40, wearing a brand new blue jacket and black boots that didn't have a single scuff on them. No dirt, no dust, nothing. That just isn't possible in terrain like that. It was a red flag the size of a billboard. She stood perfectly still, blocking their path, watching them with eyes that looked flat, dead. Then the wind shifted. It hit Levi like a physical slap. It wasn't just a bad smell, it was something else entirely. It made his throat close up. It smelled like layers of rot. First thing that hit him was a sweet, sticky smell, like meat that's been left out in a hot room for a week. Underneath that was the sharp sting of ammonia, like dirty cat litter or animal urine. But the last part was the smell of old ash, like a fire that burned out 100 years ago but was still smoking in the dirt. Levi had read about that smell. He knew exactly what it meant. Every hair on his arm stood up. Maddie didn't know any better. She was just being polite. She saw another person and smiled. "Hi there," she said. Her voice sounded way too loud. It just hung there in the silence. The woman didn't smile back. She didn't even blink. She just started moving toward them. She didn't walk like a normal person, stepping over rocks and roots. She glided. Her feet barely seemed to touch the uneven ground. She stopped about 10 feet away, planting herself right between them and the way back to the car. "Where is your camp?" the woman asked. Her voice was wrong. It was flat. No emotion in it at all. It sounded like a recording played back at the wrong speed. "What are your full names?" she asked. panic hit Levi hard. A sick feeling settled deep in his gut. His instincts were screaming at him to get out of there. He grabbed Maddie's arm, maybe a little too hard. "Maddie, we're leaving," he said, keeping his voice low. "Right now." But the woman wouldn't look at him. She locked eyes with Maddie. "The woods are dangerous," the woman said. Her voice dropped. It got deep, way deeper than a woman's voice should be. It rattled in Levi's chest. She reached into that clean blue pocket and pulled out a small bundle. It was a jagged yellow thing wrapped in a piece of stained leather. She held it out. "Take it, Maddie," she said. "It keeps the sickness out." "Don't touch it," Levi whispered. He was practically begging. He knew the rules. You don't take gifts from these things. You don't invite them in. Maddie just thought he was being paranoid again. She didn't want to be rude to a stranger. She reached out her hand. The second her fingers brushed that leather, a loud crack echoed through the trees. It sounded like a gunshot, or a massive spark of static electricity. Maddie flinched hard, gasping as she pulled her hand back, clutching the leather bundle to her chest. Levi looked at the woman's face. That neutral mask was gone. Now she was just staring with a dead, blank look. She didn't say another word. She turned around and slipped back into the trees. She didn't make a sound. No breaking twigs, no crunching leaves. She was just gone. They hiked back fast. Levi tried to tell himself it was just some weird local. He tried to ignore the smell that was still stuck in his nose. 20 minutes later, Maddie stopped walking. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She just stood there on the trail and rubbed her forehead. "I feel weird, Levi," she said. Her voice sounded empty. "I feel disconnected, like I'm watching myself walk from up in the trees." Levi told her it was the heat. He told her she needed water. He lied to her, and he lied to himself. By the time they got back to the city, she was already getting sick. It wasn't a flu. It was a slow, steady wasting away. Over the next 6 months, Levi watched the woman he loved fall apart. Her white blood cell count dropped to nothing. The doctors were stumped. They said her blood work looked like she'd been exposed to extreme radiation, but there was no source for it. Levi watched her fade. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her gums started bleeding. And then that smell came back. Her breath started to smell like that same sweet rot from the valley. Her fingernails turned black and fell off. She stopped talking. She stopped recognizing him. She turned into a living doll, just a shell with nobody home. Now Levi sits in his dark apartment, eyes locked on the hiking bag like it's an unexploded bomb. Checking it is necessary, but ignorance isn't an option anymore. He saw what happened to Maddie the second her skin brushed that leather. The rules of the curse are simple. You touch it, you own it. He isn't taking chances. In the kitchen, he snaps a dust mask tight over his face and slides his hands into a pair of thick yellow rubber cleaning gloves. No unfiltered air, no skin contact. Back at the table, the zipper hisses open. The rubber gloves squeak against the nylon as he digs into the side pocket. Fingers brush against the shape. He pulls it out. The leather bundle is already sealed inside a heavy-duty plastic freezer bag. He'd bagged it with tongs the second they got back, terrified to let it touch anything in his home. He holds the plastic bag up to the harsh light of his desk lamp. Through the clear plastic, he carefully nudges the stained leather flap open with his gloved thumb. There it is, the wolf's tooth. He leans in, squinting through the plastic. He looks at the long yellow root. He sees the way the enamel has been filed down to a sharp, unnatural point. He realizes then what he's holding. This didn't come from a wolf. It didn't come from a bear or a mountain lion. It's a human canine tooth. It was pulled right out of the jaw of a corpse. Levi went to the mountains looking for a story. He wanted proof of the supernatural. He got exactly what he asked for. But he didn't know the price was going to be Maddie. The mountain didn't just take her mind, it left a mark on him. And that's the part that really kills him. It's not just the guilt, it's that he's known Maddie since the 3rd grade. He'd been in love with her for 20 years, and he planned to finally tell her on this trip. He never said the words. He missed his shot. Now he sits alone in the dark, staring through a plastic bag at the piece of a dead man that destroyed the only woman he ever loved. If you're still here after that first encounter, you're my kind of horror addict. Shadow dwellers, like the video and subscribe so you don't have to face the next 2 stories alone. The second encounter takes us to a hospital waiting room where a surgeon shows Tiana a turquoise bead he found inside her brother's lung. She realizes there was no entry wound because the object wasn't shot with a gun. It was sung into his body by an executioner standing on a ridge 5 miles away. The surgeon held the glass jar up to the fluorescent lights of the waiting room. It was a small, sterile thing, the kind used for samples that would be sent to a lab and never seen again, but Tiana couldn't take her eyes off it. Inside the jar, floating in a thin mixture of red fluid, sat a single bead. It was turquoise. It was perfectly polished, glowing with that deep, electric blue that people travel all over the Southwest to find. It was beautiful, and it was the most terrifying thing Tiana had ever seen. "We found this in the lower lobe of the left lung," the doctor said. His voice was tired. He was a man of science, a man who believed in X-rays and blood tests and things that made sense. He turned the jar, and the bead clinked softly against the glass. "There is no entry wound, Tiana. No scar tissue on his chest. No hole in the running shirt he was wearing. It's as if it just materialized inside him." Tiana didn't look at the doctor. She looked out the hospital window toward the dark, jagged silhouette of the South Dike rising against the night sky. The doctor called it a medical anomaly. He used big words to hide the fact that he was scared. But Tiana knew the truth. She knew her brother hadn't died from a heart attack or a blood clot. She knew the stone hadn't broken his skin because it had been sung into his body. 2 months ago, her brother was untouchable. He was 27 years old, a DNA runner in perfect condition. He was training for the Shiprock Marathon, and he moved across the high desert like he was made of wind and muscle. It was a Tuesday morning, bright and sharp. The air at that altitude usually feels thin, crisp like a razor. They were running a 12-mile loop near the volcanic rock of the South Dike. Tiana was keeping pace, listening to the rhythmic crunch of their shoes on the dry earth. Then, her brother stopped. He had found a cleft in the black rock. It was a dark, jagged opening, like a mouth that had been cut into the side of the dike. Tiana stopped 10 feet away, her stomach turned over. You know that feeling when you walk into a room where 2 people have just been screaming at each other? The air feels heavy. The air near that hole felt like that, but worse. It felt thick. It felt like trying to breathe underwater. The silence coming from that cave wasn't empty. It was waiting. "Don't," Tiana said. Her voice sounded flat and small against the massive wall of rock. But her brother was full of that runner's high. He was flooded with endorphins, feeling strong and invincible. He laughed at her. It was a bright, confident laugh that echoed too loudly in the quiet desert. He ducked his head and disappeared into the dark. Tiana stood in the sun, shivering. She heard him moving inside. She heard the scuff of his shoes, and then a low whistle of surprise. "You need to see this," his voice called out. It sounded muffled, like he was speaking from inside a box. "There's piles of stuff in here, old stuff." He came out a minute later, grinning, dusting off his hands. He told her what he found. He described piles of wolf pelts that looked too fresh to be old artifacts. He talked about bundles of human hair tied together with sinew. He mentioned a fine dusting of blue powder covering the floor, glowing faintly in the gloom. He had run his hands over the fur. He had touched the blue dust. He joked about the old stories, about the medicine people left behind to scare kids. He thought it was superstition. He didn't understand that some stories aren't meant to scare you. They are meant to warn you. As they ran back to the truck, Tiana noticed he was rubbing his chest, just a little, like he had a sudden itch deep under his ribs. The change didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a car crash. It was a slow erosion, like wind wearing down a canyon wall. A week after the cave, the coughing started. It wasn't a wet, sick cough. It was dry. It sounded like two stones clicking together in his chest. Tiana watched him during their warm-ups. This man, who could run 20 miles without breaking his form, started wheezing after 10 minutes. His skin changed. The rich, healthy color drained out of him, replaced by a gray, ash-like tint. It looked like he was fading. He told Tiana it was just allergies. He told her it was the dust from the trails. But Tiana watched him climb the stairs to his apartment one evening. He had to stop halfway, gripping the railing, his knuckles white, gasping for air that didn't seem to reach his lungs. He was being hollowed out. The night of the collapse, 3 weeks before the marathon, he went for a solo run on Indian Service Route 5010. He told Tiana he needed to push through the slump. He needed to prove to himself he could still run. He never came back. A rancher found him at dawn. He was curled in the sand of a dry arroyo, miles from the road. But it was the tracks in the dirt that told the real story. The rancher showed Tiana the photos later. Her brother hadn't just fallen. The footprints showed a spiral, a death spiral. At some point in the night, the pain had hit him. He had started running in a circle, frantic and confused. The circles got tighter and tighter. The footprints were deep and uneven, showing how he had stumbled, gotten up, and run again. It looked like he was trying to outrun something that was already inside him. He was running from his own body. While the doctors at the hospital were running toxicology screens and talking about unexplained thoracic events, Tiana went to the library. Then she went to the elders. She sat quietly, bringing them coffee, acting like she was just seeking prayer. But she was listening. She learned a term she wished she could forget: object shooting. The elders spoke of a weapon that isn't made of wood or metal. They whispered about a bow made from a human shin bone. They said that in the wrong hands, hands that have turned away from harmony and toward darkness, this bow doesn't fire arrows. It fires curses. It sings an object directly into the victim's body. A piece of bone, a sharp rock, a bead. It travels through the air invisible, and it passes through skin without breaking it, burying itself deep in the organs. It didn't matter how fast her brother ran. By touching those pelts in the cave, by disrespecting that place, he had marked himself. He had invited the shooter in. The final piece of the puzzle didn't come from a book. It came from a security camera. There is a grainy feed from a traffic junction on US 491, miles away from where her brother died. Tiana managed to see the footage from that morning. The timestamp matched the moment her brother hit the dirt in the arroyo. In the top corner of the screen, up on the high ridge of the South Dike, there was a figure. It was tall. It was a pale, blurry shape standing perfectly still against the dawn sky. It was holding something long and white to its shoulder. It wasn't a rifle. It was bone white. The figure was aiming straight down into the valley, 5 miles away, aiming right at the spot where her brother was taking his last breath. It wasn't a hunter looking for deer. It was an executioner waiting for the curse to land. Her brother is in the ground now. The hospital closed the file, labeling it an unexplained thoracic event. When they were done, the surgeon tried to be kind. He held out the small glass jar with the turquoise bead inside. He thought Tiana would want it. He thought it was a memento, the last thing that was part of him. Tiana backed away until her back hit the cold wall of the waiting room. She shook her head, her hands trembling by her sides. She didn't scream, but the look in her eyes stopped the doctor cold. She wouldn't touch it. She wouldn't even let her shadow fall across the table where he held it. "Destroy it," she whispered. She didn't want it in her house. She didn't want it in her life. She knew what it really was. It wasn't a gemstone. It was ammunition. Tiana sits at her window most evenings now. She looks out across the desert toward the jagged black rocks of the South Dike. The wind picks up at night out there, making a high whistling sound as it cuts through the canyons. It sounds like a flute made of bone. She knows she never touched the cave wall. She knows she didn't walk inside. She knows there is no stone sitting in her lung, waiting to stop her breath. But she also knows the math. She knows about lines of sight. If that pale figure on the ridge could see her brother through the sight of a bone bow, it could see her standing 10 feet away. It saw her face. It saw her fear. The shooter isn't gone. It's just waiting for the next time she steps into view. As bad as that was, the last story is worse. This time it isn't the open desert. It's the claustrophobic kitchen of a single wide trailer. Here, Des wakes up to a wet snapping sound in the dark and finds his foster brother hunched over the table, tearing into a raw flank of beef in the dead of the night. They say that logic is a fortress. They say if you refuse to believe in the monsters, they can't hurt you. That's a lie. A skinwalker doesn't care about your skepticism any more than a wildfire cares if you believe in heat. It will burn your life down just the same. Des was a man who prided himself on seeing the world exactly as it was. Concrete, steel, and sweat. He wore his skepticism like armor, refusing to let the old desert superstitions in. But he was about to learn that armor doesn't do much good when the thing hunting you is already inside the walls. Dispatchers usually hear screaming, but Des's voice was flat, like the desert floor at noon, when he reported that his foster mother wasn't breathing. Red and blue lights splashed against the dusty siding of the single-wide trailer, turning the Arizona sand into a crime scene that nobody was actually investigating. Des stood on the gravel, watching the paramedics haul out a gurney while a deputy scribbled "heart attack" on a clipboard without looking up. The trailer felt wrong, stripped of the sense of safety Ruthie had spent years building with cornmeal and prayers. Inside, lamps were overturned, and the protective bundle of herbs Ruthie kept above the door was shredded on the floor like it had been hit by a weed whacker. Yazzie was waiting by the chain-link fence before the ambulance even cleared the driveway. He didn't offer a condolence. He simply looked Des in the eye and delivered the news with the cold certainty of a man who knows the desert's secrets. He told Des that the boy, Evan, had done this, that the kid had sacrificed the only mother either of them had ever known to pay the entry fee for the skin. Des snapped. He shouted down the neighbor's folklore with the aggression of a man trying to convince himself as much as the other person. He played the part of the rational skeptic perfectly, dismissing the accusation as disrespect for the dead. But as he turned his back and walked into the empty trailer, locking the door, His hands shook so violently he could barely turn the deadbolt. He told himself it was just adrenaline, but deep down, a cold sliver of doubt was already working its way into his gut. Grief has a way of blurring the days, but looking back, the signs had been there for years. Ruthie had raised both boys in that trailer, protecting them with the same rituals. Des had always listened to her stories as warnings, maps of where not to go. But Evan had listened differently. As a lonely foster kid passed around the system, Evan hadn't heard fear in those stories. He had heard power. While Des was working shifts, Evan had been tearing through Ruthie's private journals, not to keep the monsters out, but to learn how to let them in. Des refused to admit it to Yazzie, but he watched his foster brother closely that week. The trailer felt infected. Evan didn't mourn. He didn't cry. He started disappearing for long stretches, hanging around the forbidden stalls at the flea market, the ones Ruthie said never to visit. When he came home, he didn't smell like a teenager should. He smelled like a bonfire put out with dirt, heavy smoke and acrid ash, masked by a thick, choking layer of cheap Axe body spray. Des would sit across from him at dinner, staring at the thick turquoise necklace Evan suddenly started wearing, a piece of jewelry Yazzie had once said was used to hide the scar from the initiation ritual. Des wanted to press him, to ask where he got it, but the air in the room felt heavy, like the pressure before a storm. Logic told him it was just a necklace. Instinct told him to run. Then came the meat. Des woke up at 3 a.m. to find the kitchen light off. Evan was hunched over the laminate table in total silence, tearing into a raw, bloody flank of beef with his teeth. The only sound in the trailer was the wet snap of sinew. Des stood in the hallway, paralyzed. He wanted to yell, to shake his brother, to act like the tough older sibling. But he didn't. He backed into his room and locked the door, sweating through his sheets until sunrise, terrified that the thing in the kitchen might hear him breathe. Evan moved out a week later to live with that mentor from the market. Des put on a brave face. He changed the locks and told himself the problem was gone. But Yazzie remained at the fence, insisting that the boy hadn't truly left, merely changed forms. The neighbor warned that the creature knew Des suspected him, and that knowledge made Des a target. A month later, the haunting started. A massive, scarred coyote began sitting in the yard every night, wearing that same oily turquoise necklace. Then came the voice, Ruthie calling Des's name from the brush. Des spent his nights sitting in the dark with a baseball bat, telling himself it was a prank, that it was just a coyote. That logic could explain it. But his hands gripped that bat until his knuckles turned white. Yazzie caught him outside the next morning. Des looked like a wreck, eyes bloodshot, jumpy. The neighbor didn't lecture him. Instead, he handed over a slip of paper and explained the rules of a final, desperate gambit. He told Des that speaking the Skinwalker's true name could break the curse, but the margin for error was non-existent. If the speaker missed by even a breath, or used a name that wasn't truly binding, the curse would bounce back and latch onto them forever. Des snatched the paper. It just said, Evan. He scoffed at the old man, acting like it was a joke, treating the paper like trash. But inside, he was desperate for a weapon. He kept it. That night, the coyote was on the porch. The voice mimicked Ruthie perfectly, begging to be let in. Pure terror mixed with rage finally flooded Des's chest. He was done hiding. He was done being afraid of his own mind. He kicked the door open and stormed onto the porch, lungs full of air, ready to scream the name Evan and end this nightmare once and for all. But he froze. He looked at the creature, at the oil-black eyes that held a human intelligence. And suddenly, logic, the very thing he used to defend himself, turned against him. His mind flashed to the foster care file on Ruthie's table years ago. Evan wasn't a name given by a mother. It was a label assigned by a caseworker in Phoenix because the kid had no history. It was a placeholder, a clerical entry. If he screamed Evan, he wasn't calling out a soul. He was reading a government file, and Yazzy's warning echoed in his ears. If you are wrong, it latches onto you. Des's mouth snapped shut. The doubt paralyzed him. He looked at the coyote, and the coyote looked back, tilting its head, waiting for him to take the bait, waiting for him to pull the trigger on an empty gun. Des backed up, stepping back into the trailer and slamming the door, locking it with trembling hands. He slid down against the metal, defeated. He couldn't say it. He couldn't take the risk. The next morning, the look on Yazzy's face confirmed the worst. There were no words exchanged, just a grim nod of understanding. Des hadn't banished the monster, but he had stepped out on the porch. He had engaged it. The creature now knew that Des was aware of its true nature. The neighbor explained the grim reality without needing to shout it. Death would have been a mercy. Now, Des was simply a battery. The Skinwalker fed on fear, and by sparing it, Des had guaranteed a lifetime supply. Now, Des's life has become a mirror image of the woman he used to call crazy. He maintains the facade of a normal life during the day, but every evening, he stops at the store for a 5-pound bag of white cornmeal. He pulls into the driveway as the sun sets, pacing the perimeter, scanning for tracks. Inside, the ritual is always the same. Des pours a thick line of the coarse grain across every door and window. He checks the locks. Then, he turns up the static on the radio to drown out the silence. He sits in the armchair, gripping the armrests, waiting. Outside, the voice calls his name. Sometimes Ruthie, sometimes Evan, sometimes just a whistle. Des doesn't open the blinds. He just sits there, a prisoner in his own home, finally believing everything he was told, realizing too late that logic doesn't stop a monster that has the keys to your house. Des spends his nights pacing a cage of his own making, proof that you don't have to be a believer to become a victim. He used his skepticism as a shield, but in the end, it was the very thing that stayed his hand. A skinwalker doesn't need your permission to enter your life. It just needs you to hesitate. And once it's inside, it doesn't leave until it's finished its meal. If any of these stories got under your skin, you're not the only one. Shadow Dwellers, if you want more Skinwalker encounters, you know where to find me. Until next time, trust your fear.